the French ambassador was summoned by Russians for the case of the French mercenaries in Ukraine. What was the problem?
Well, there were at least 60, if not more, French so-called mercenaries in this hotel, former hospital in Kharkiv that the Russians hit and killed. They killed at least 60 of them. So there's some reports that there may have been as many as 200 in the hotel. So France has a problem. If you've followed the number of foreign mercenaries in country in Ukraine since the start of the special military operation in February 2022, there was an initial spike during the first 6 months of 2022. And then after that, the number of mercenaries has been sort of steadily declining. People getting, there's no good command and control. They're not getting paid. They're tired of the corruption, or they're just tired of fighting. So they've been leaving the country. So what's so unusual about this is you had such a large number of French soldiers in this one location. That tells me that this is part of an organized effort to bring French military capabilities under the guise of intelligence operations, where they're not wearing a uniform, at least to France. Maybe they'll put on a Ukrainian uniform, but that these are people that have actual skills, such as working with Patriot missile batteries, or shooting particularly an artillery piece, like 155 millimeter artillery. Because Ukraine has lost those skilled personnel and they need to make up for it. Because this is so unusual that you would get this many mercenaries in this one location. Remains to be seen if there are any Brits or Americans as well. So that's why the French ambassador's in there, and he's got to, he's going to go in and lie. Oh, we knew, mon Dieu, we knew nothing about it. Oh, this is, ridiculous. Macron could put a stop to it immediately by just simply announcing any French citizen that is fighting in Ukraine will be arrested, be subject to arrest in France. Period. And do you think the French are saying, oh, well, and we're going to do everything we can to work to peace? Oh, hell no. They're saying they're going to ramp up their missile production so they can send Ukraine more missiles to shell Russia with. From the standpoint of international law, France has just made itself a target. I think the Russians are showing great restraint because they could launch missiles and start attacking French military bases and factories because of French complicity in enabling this war.
We talk about French mercenaries. Do we know any other mercenaries, any other country that was participating as organized as France is doing right now?
The Poles have had a pretty significant number of mercenaries in there. The Brits also. There have been some Americans. Americans haven't been as plenteous as the Brits or the Poles in particular, but you've also had people from Norway, from Sweden, from Colombia, from Israel. So, there's been quite an international collection. The difference of these ones that are killed lately, the mercenaries that showed up 2 years ago, a lot of them were, guys that played video games and said, oh man, I want to go out and play war. They really had no military experience or training, and therefore they were probably as much of a liability as they were a help. But I suspect that the ones that were killed in Kharkiv the other day, sounds like they were former French Foreign Legion. So that means they're skilled. They've got combat chops, and they were going to, I think, try to fill in gaps that exist right now in the Ukrainian army.
Emmanuel Macron just recently said that we cannot let Russia win because of the security of Europe. How they can define the security of Europe, putting Russia out of this?
They've been using this playbook since, well, let's go back to 1950s. So when the French were in the Mbim pool, we've got to stop the communists or else they're going to take over the world. And then the United States continued that. We got to, if Vietnam falls, it's the dominoes. The dominoes are going to, communism going to sweep the globe. Then when the communism no longer was a good enough scare tactic, it wasn't the boogeyman you could frighten voters with. Terrorism. We gotta, the terrorists are here and the terrorists are there. We gotta stop them. So that means suspend your civil rights, give the government full unfettered freedom to spy on you, and just in order to get those terrorists. Okay, now we're back to it's not a communist threat, but some in the West talk about Russia as if it's a communist empire. The Russians are bent on rebuilding and recapturing their empire. And I'm going, what colonies did they have in Africa? What colonies did Russia have in South America? What colonies did Russia have in Asia? Oh, the answer is none. The only people that had colonies and still have colonies were the Europeans and the United States. The people say, oh, well, the United States doesn't have colonies. Oh, what do you call the Virgin Islands? What do you call Guam? What do you call Puerto Rico? Please have a little decency with yourself to at least admit what you are, what we are. And so they're doing this projection. They project onto Russia what they themselves are wanting to do. It's the West that wants to invade Russia, break up Russia, take possession of Russia's natural resources. Now, get rid of Putin, because the problem with that damn Putin is he will not allow the oligarchs to rape the Russians. He's put a stop to that. How dare he? Doesn't he know that the rich are entitled to have their way with the poor? So, yeah, that's what's going on.
Larry, the second part of what Macron said, if Russia wins, the risk of non-compliance with the established rules of the international order will increase. What does it mean? Who wrote these rules and who's going to obey these rules?
Well, it's the perverse version of the golden rule. Now, the golden rule in the Bible is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. But the perverse golden rule is those with the gold get to make the rules. So this international rules-based order this is what the United States got to set up in the aftermath of World War II, because we were the strongest country economically in the world, and the second strongest, or maybe the strongest, co-equal with Russia, the Soviet Union at the time. But we set up and based all the key international institutions in either New York, Washington, D.C., or Switzerland. So you've got, or The Hague as well. But you've got the International Monetary Fund and World Bank. They're located about 3-4 blocks west of the White House along Pennsylvania Avenue. You have, for a while, we had the gold standard, but then went off the gold standard, and basically the dollar became the standard international reserve currency. The United Nations, based in New York, where the United States plays host to that. So this international rules-based order is whatever the West decides it is. So, for example, they're against Russia going in action, invading Ukraine, after Ukraine spent the previous 9 years attacking Russian-speaking citizens in Ukraine and cooperating in military exercises with NATO that were designed to attack Russia. So Russia is a bad guy for doing that. However, the United States, when it decided to invade Iraq in 2003, we did it for a good reason. Our motives were good. Now, we didn't have any permission from the United Nations. We didn't go through the international rules-based order to get that. But, we can go we can go bomb Iraq. We can bomb Syria. We can attack Afghanistan. We got approval from Congress to do that, but we didn't go anywhere to anyone in the international community to get permission to do that. And now, just like we're launching attacks in Yemen. Hey, we'll attack those Houthis because we said so. We make the rules and we get to decide very arbitrarily whether they apply or not to you. Oh, also about the sanctity of your own property, your own natural resources, your money. Man, if your money is in our banks, we can take it anytime we want. And so we're gonna take the $300 billion of Russian assets that we confiscated illegally, and we're gonna use them however we want, and there's not a thing you can do about it. Or at least that's what we think. That's the perception of the policymakers.
The British Foreign Secretary said that the current situation is reminiscent of the 30s when the West tried to appease Hitler. What are the similarities between Putin and Hitler and what Russia is doing and what Hitler was doing during those days? Why they're trying to picture these two together?
Yeah, well, so I see lots of parallels. I mean, number one, Vladimir Putin has blonde hair. Hitler had black hair. Vladimir Putin doesn't have a mustache. Hitler has a mustache. Let's see. Putin was a lawyer. Hitler was a failed painter. Putin was a KGB officer. Hitler was a terrible private in the German army. Putin has not written a book about conquering the world. Hitler did. So yeah, see, they're exactly alike. I mean, good God, they look like twins. How can you tell them apart? I mean, that is so abjectly stupid that you've got to question the quality of the British higher education to turn out somebody that is that brain dead to say something that ignorant. Putin is a nationalist and is not talking about Lebensraum, as did Hitler. Putin's not a racist. He doesn't harbor an inner hatred for Jews, unlike Hitler. So it is just, it's part of this Western obsession. They're pissed, furious with Vladimir Putin for two reasons. Number one, when Putin cut off the oligarchs from getting in bed with all the Western investors, man, they were salivating. They thought they had the chance to go ripping through the Russian natural resources like nobody's business. Oil, gas, uranium, nickel, aluminum, rare earth minerals. Oh my God, it was all these resources for the taking, and we can get them. And then that damn Putin put a stop to that. He protected it for the Russian people. How dare he deny the Klaus Schwabs of the world their chance to have their way with Russian resources? That's number one. Number two, Russia has rediscovered its traditional Christian values. And as such, it rejects the homosexual agenda. It rejects the woke agenda. It rejects the agenda that wants to tear apart the nuclear family and say it doesn't matter whether a child has a mother and father. No, the Russians are saying, hell no, it absolutely does matter. In fact, to that end, we're going to start offering a program where women who are just learned they're pregnant in their first trimester, they can take leave because they want to promote having as many Russian babies as possible. The West hates that. Westerners don't want to be bothered with children. We'd rather let all these little black and brown people come across our border so they can do all the dirty work. Let them have the kids. You know, don't bother us because we want to be able to be free to have our vacations and to drink our expensive lattes and to drive our worthless electric vehicles. Please don't bother us with children. So yeah, those two things, that I think goes a long way to explain a lot of the hatred of Vladimir Putin. He represents the very values the West is rejecting.
When it comes to Europe, the other important country is Germany right now. And it seems that Germans, they're so afraid of Russia. They're talking about a conflict with Russia. Why they're thinking this way? What are the roots of this type of thinking?
Yeah, was it Deutschland keine über alles? You know, never again on top. Germany is a sort of a preview of coming attractions for what's going to happen in the United States in the United Kingdom and in France. The government got taken over by these radical Greens, these extremists who believe that fossil fuels are the curse, that you got to get rid of that you need to turn to clean energy like electric vehicles. But the dummies don't understand that to power those electric vehicles, you have to plug them in. And so who's going to generate that power? They can't rely on solar panels in Germany because it's, it gets dark early there these days because it's winter and they're in the Northern Hemisphere. And they can't rely really on windmills either. That's only going to produce about 5% of what they want, but they want to get rid of their nuclear power plants. So they're left with what? Wood stoves? And you're supposed to power electrical vehicles with that. So they've literally been deindustrializing themselves. And by the way, they signed on for going to war in a de facto war with Russia. So that instead of paying for, 50 cents a gallon or a liter for gas, they're going to pay $1 a liter because they cut off the supplies from Russia. I mean, it's pure insanity. And then the opposition to this green agenda, the Green Party, is growing stronger, and the Greens are terrified. So they're declaring that they're the resurrection of the far right-wing Nazis. Except here's the ironic thing about it. These very people, the Olaf Scholz, the Baerbachs, they are supporting actual living, breathing, tattoo-wearing neo-Nazis in Ukraine. The real fascists, the real Nazis. They got no problem supporting them. But by God, we can't have these people who think that the power of the federal government ought to be limited. That's dangerous, because if they do that, it takes power away from the extremists.
It seems that the Biden administration is trying to convince the Zelensky administration to go on defensive instead of being on offensive. What's the strategy right now on the part of the Biden administration?
If you find out, let me know. And in fact, let's write a memo and send it to Biden and let him know, because they have no clue. Strategy? They're not thinking strategically. They're entirely thinking tactically. We got to get some more money for Ukraine. Why? To give them more weapons. Okay, but they don't have enough soldiers to operate the weapons that they have, and the Russians have them outgunned, outnumbered in terms of personnel. Yeah, but we got to get more money to them. And then you get them the money, then what? Oh, well, they'll use it to stop the Russians. With what? What men? They've actually deployed an entire unit of women. I guess they're hoping that they will, they'll be terribly mad at some point during a period of a month and really able to fight the Russians. But I mean, it's disgraceful what's taking place. So the money that Biden's seeking, really, it's more for domestic political consumption in the United States, because they get that $60 billion, then they can let contracts to Raytheon, to General Dynamics, to Lockheed Martin, to other defense producers. That money stays in the United States. It's ostensibly going to Ukraine. But what it's really doing is buying weapons and vehicles and kit that is produced in the United States. And then in these particular congressional districts where the voters, that's where some of their voters work, and they're happy. So they'll reelect their congressman or their senator. And then those weapon systems may get sent eventually to Ukraine. But the reality is, even if Congress comes through and says, okay, yeah, we'll give you $60 billion, it's not going to make any kind of difference in Ukraine. No more so than the, what has been 220 billion so far or more. It made zero difference. Every Wunderwaffen, every glorious special weapon system that's been deployed has failed. HIMARS, game changer. Remember that? Not much of a change. Patriot missile batteries, that'll stop all those Russian missiles. Nope. Russians destroy those at will, to the point that the United States is asking Ukraine, please keep them in the warehouse. Don't get them out. We can't afford to lose them. And then the Russians find out where the warehouse is and blow it to hell. So this is the strategy. They're hoping that somehow, and this is where they believe their own rhetoric. They continue to convince themselves that Ukraine is fighting Russia to a standstill, to a stalemate, and that if they can just hold out through the election in 2024, that then once Trump is defeated, then we can, we can finally, deal with this situation. Well, I don't think Ukraine's going to make it past the summer, candidly, even with additional aid that comes from Europe and the United States, because you've got to have trained soldiers that can use that. That's what they're lacking. And you don't create them overnight. Don't create them in a week. Don't create them in a month. It takes, if you're just a regular soldier who's, doesn't, who knows how to march, knows how to put his uniform on, and knows how to zip up his pants, and maybe know how to load and unload a rifle. He learns that after 13 weeks in basic training, 3 months. Then they go on for, let's say, another 6 months of extended training, advanced individual training. It depends on this, if they're being trained to drive a tank, or if they're being trained to shoot artillery, or if they're being trained to do, reconnaissance, ground pounder kind of stuff. It's variable lengths, but still you've got to go through that training before you get deployed to the field. Well, let's say they magically come up with right now 50,000 people to train. Where are they going to train them? There's not a secure base in Ukraine anywhere that soldiers can come together in a mass group and train and live to see another day. The Russians made that pretty clear when they hit Kharkiv the other day with those French mercenaries. Yeah, put them all in the barracks. We'll take care of it. Kill them while they're sleeping. So, these are just practical realities. And then helicopters, fixed wing aircraft, who's going to fly those? The Russians are regularly and consistently shooting down and decimating the Ukrainian Air Force. It hasn't really been a credible force for more than a year and a half. And now they want to eventually bring in F-16 soon. Good. Russians will shoot those down too. And so that doesn't change the situation on the ground for Ukraine. That is going to continue to lose territory until the Russians decide to make a big push and shove them all back across the Dnieper.
The Ukrainian foreign minister says that you don't sacrifice your soldiers, give us weapons, money, and we finish the job. How's the mobilization of the Ukrainian soldiers going on right now? How much more do they have to sacrifice in this war?
They don't have it. That's the problem. They're putting pressure on other European states that have received Ukrainian refugees, young men, send them back. And some, like I think the guy, the prime minister of Estonia, is talking about, oh yeah, we'll round them up, send them back to Ukraine. They're complaining, some commanders have complained in Ukrainian outlets like on Telegram that the guys they're getting are over 40, and they've got their own medical issues and their health issues, and they're overweight, and they're not, they're useless. All they present is just some more hot air in a room, which if you're freezing, if you're in a trench and you're freezing your ass off, well, maybe it's good to have some more hot air there blowing around you. That's about it. They're not combat effective.
It seems that Ukrainian army is fearing Russian forces build up in the northern Ukraine. There is a group of 20,000 troops in that region. What's the reason for that? Are they going to attack from the north?
Well, Russia is not divulging its plans. So it could be a feint. It could be they actually intend on making a push from there. What we are seeing is Russia is not concentrating in just one area. They're pushing from the south to the middle to the north. And at each push, it forces the Ukrainians to divide their forces further and try to stop the advance, which they've been unable to. So it's just, and part of the Russian strategy is this forces more attrition on the Ukrainian units. So you get more and more of them are dying.
I don't know if you saw this recent interview with the former advisor to Zelensky, Arestovich. His name is Arestovich. He said that in the start of April 2022, there were agreements between Ukrainians and Russians. They signed everything. They opened champagne to celebrate.
That's not what the West wanted. The West's desire is to divide Russia up into pieces and take what it wants. I mean, really, it's like those old Vikings that went doing raids in what was formerly England. You know, they land on the shore, they come ashore, they rape and pillage and plunder, and then pile all the goods in their boats and maybe sell back to Norway, to the fjords. That's what the West is wanting to do to Russia. Russia is the number one country in the world with natural resources. And they, the Western analysts really are so completely off base when they look at the start of this special military operation. Because Putin he's trying to get Western attention. Hey, he'd been talking and talking and talking, and the West was ignoring. So finally, they launched this operation, but they had no intention of taking Kiev. But they got close enough that they knew that it was a possibility, and they entered into these negotiations. And boy, if Ukraine would have taken the deal back then, you're right, they would have saved. I bet there'd be 300,000-400,000 Ukrainians still alive that are now dead, and not to mention, maybe another 800,000 that have been grievously wounded and incapacitated. But the United States, and with the help of its poodle, the United Kingdom, warned Zelensky, warned Zaluzhny, and pressured him and said, reject this peace agreement, which they did. And, as one of the goodwill gestures by the Russians back then was they were north of Kiev. So Putin ordered the withdrawal of Russian forces, these tank columns that were up there. Some were described as 24. They couldn't figure out if it's 24 miles or 24 kilometers or 40 miles, 40, kept getting different numbers. But it was a long column. That's the point. They pulled out. And as soon as they pulled out, the Brits mounted this propaganda operation in Bucha, where they claimed that the Russians had slaughtered these citizens, executed them in cold blood. The reality, all the people that were killed were wearing white armbands, which was a symbol for the Russians of surrender. And the Ukrainians killed them and then staged the bodies to make it look like it had been the Russians in order to fully arouse anger in the West against Russia, so the West would continue to support military operations, even though they had reached an effective a structure for entering into negotiations to secure a lasting peace. There's some blood on the hands of the Biden administration and of the Boris Johnson administration in enabling the Ukrainian war to go on as it is.
When it comes to the reason of this attitude of not negotiating with Russia, whenever Putin wanted to negotiate with the West, they thought that Russia is weak. This perception goes on and on right now after 19 months of this war, this catastrophe in Ukraine. It seems that they're still thinking that Russia is weak. What are the roots of this kind of thinking? Why they're thinking Russia is weak? Russia is doing better than before this war started. Yeah. Economically and militarily.
Well, they're not educated. The education system in the United States is abysmal. They don't really teach much about foreign culture, foreign lands. You have to sort of learn that on your own. The average American still believes that Russia is the Soviet Union, that it's a communist state, that it's a dictatorship, and that there's no freedom, and all this crap that was spread by Alexander Solzhenitsyn when he came over as an exile in the 70s. It just, when they start from that premise that Russia's evil, Russia's bad, and anybody that tries to present the alternative gets attacked. And so it's just, it's willful blindness is the only way I can describe it. Because if they, once you accept Russia for what Russia is, it's a great contrast with what the United States is. The average student in a Russian school or university is much smarter than the average American. They're able to do better than, we got more that do mathematics and science than the average American. They speak more languages than the average American. So the Russians have always been thought of as sort of this backward, unsophisticated group of louts. They're the ones that really won World War II, not the Europeans by any stretch. Europeans got crushed. It wasn't the Brits that beat the Germans back. It was the Russians. And the Russian defeat of the German army in the East is what made it possible for the Western Allies to have a pretty easy go of it in Western Europe as they, fought their way towards Germany in 1944 and 1945. So this is, it goes back for the Europeans. This goes back a long ways. I think they're still mad at the Bolsheviks for killing the Tsar's family.
What we don't see in the EU is this unity. It's gone. How do you see the situation of Europe right now?
Well, the reason they call it the European Union is the name, the International Association of People Who Herd Cats, that was already taken. So yeah, there's no unity in Europe. There is, or the unity that exists is based upon embracing a rabid belief in climate change to the point of being irrational, and then enabling Nazis as they're doing in Ukraine. That's where, people like Viktor Orban and Fico in Slovakia pushing back, saying, no, we're not going down that path. And so what are they trying? They're trying to punish Orban and the rest of Hungary, get them basically expelled from the EU or not be able to vote. So this is, and at the same time, you see the Europeans are increasingly talking very bellicose terms about that we're going to go to war with Russia. It's unavoidable. We need to prepare. Let's build our forces up. Yeah, they're building their forces up, and they got a bunch of fat, overweight teenagers with purple hair, nose rings, tattoos on their eyebrows and eyelids, and they've never shot a gun in their life. But yeah, these are those warriors that are going to make a difference against the Chechens. Cut me a break. The French, the British, the Germans, they're living on their glory days. They're singing songs about what they were doing 50 years ago, 60 years ago. But you're now 60, 50 years older. You don't have the capability or talent that you once did. I saw a video comparing a recent march of German soldiers, and they were more sort of shuffling around. They didn't look very sharp, crisp, coordinated. Then there was one from the 1960s. So they still had a little bit of that Nazi spring in their step. They were, goose stepping along and everybody moving the same, quite a difference. So in 50 years, Germany has lost a lot of what it had from just public demonstration. not to mention their ability to fight. Nobody in Europe has fought a war of any consequence against a peer since World War II. And most of, Germany was fighting against France and England. And so everybody from those generations are gone. Or, there's a few left alive, but they're not involved in any significant way. So you got these guys all the talking tough and having never done anything. Meanwhile, Russia's now got, 2 years of active warfare under its belt, fighting a proxy UN army. That's the key. The proxy army of NATO. And they beat it. Didn't just prevent it from winning, they beat it. Look at US and Germany. Oh, we're out of shells right now. And the German leaders tried to go get the Bundestag to approve, hey, let's send those long-range missiles to Ukraine. And the Bundestag said, nine, nope, not going to do that. Not going to happen. Overwhelmingly beat it. So what you've got is a disconnect between the leaders of these elite institutions, just like the goons that showed up in Davos, and your average person that wants to, come home at night and eat a nice schnitzel with some sauerkraut and not be bothered. They just the elite are hell bent on starting a war that they would expect the masses to fight, and the masses are saying, we're not having any part of that. Forget about it. Middle class, nope. That's why kids, in the United States aren't signing up for the Army like they used to. Same for the Navy, same for the Air Force. I believe it's same for the Marines.
NBC News reported that nearly 1/5 of Israeli soldiers killed in Gaza died due to friendly fire and other accidents. When you look at what was going on and what's going on right now in Gaza, how did you find the way that Israelis are fighting in this conflict?
They're unprofessional, they're untrained, poorly led. That's why you get this goat rope. Or the Charlie Foxtrot is in military terminology that is going on. They kill their own soldiers because they don't have good fire discipline. We talked a couple of weeks back when they shot and killed 3 hostages of their own. And the guys surrendered. They didn't have any weapon on them. Soldiers still shot them because that's the rules of engagement. So you're going to shoot as many civilians as you want. The only limitation is if you run out of ammunition. Israel said, "Oh, we're gonna defeat, eliminate, destroy Hamas." Now, how's that going? Hamas, keeps coming up in areas which the Israelis claim they pacified, and blowing up Israeli tanks and Israeli positions. So Israel's going to continue to suffer more casualties. Yeah, they're killing a lot of Palestinians. It's not clear yet, though, that they're killing a lot of the actual fighters. They're killing a lot of the civilians. And that's, they think that's going to prevent some recruitment. But what it's really doing is it's enraging the Palestinian people to want revenge, that they're going to have revenge. They will have revenge. And we're not talking this year or next year. It may take decades, but they're going to have revenge. So what Israel is now ensuring that it's never going to have another peaceful day in its future if they keep this up. And then Israel is beating its chest like a drunken gorilla, thinking that it's we're gonna go fight Hezbollah. We'll take them on too. Good luck, guys. I encourage them to do it, because the sooner they do that, the sooner they're going to get their ass kicked. And the sooner they get their ass kicked, then maybe they'll come to the senses, stop this senseless killing, and enter into some serious negotiations where the Palestinian people will have a secure, independent state, that they don't have to say, "Mother, may I," to Israel, where Israel doesn't have the right to control them, the right to decide what they do, the right to decide who they elect, that they are able to be their own masters and have their own self-determination.
It seems that Israelis are slowing down their operations in Gaza. It's because of these type of casualties. It's because of the Biden administration. It's part of a new strategy on their part.
Oh, no, they don't have they're like the United States. They don't have a strategy. I mean, their strategy is to erase every Palestinian from Gaza and the West Bank. Erase them, get rid of them, push them out. But, these Palestinians aren't cooperating. They're not going willingly. So what's happened is Israel has, started it off with a lot of energy and a lot of resources and people all enthusiastic. Well, now this war is going on into its third month, approaching its fourth month. And with that, Israel is suffering a significant number of casualties, not as many as the Palestinians by any stretch, but they're still suffering casualties. And worse than the killed in action, I think Israel, several of us suspect Israel's understating the KIA. I think it may be up around 400, maybe higher. But the wounded in action that are paraplegic or amputees, those numbers are going way up. And they're overwhelming Israel's medical system to be able to treat and care for these people. And so that's one way. The longer this conflict drags out for both Hamas and Hezbollah, the more damage they can inflict on Israel and the more difficult Israel will have meeting its needs and its resources.
Israeli Defense Minister Gallant abandoned a discussion in the war cabinet of the Netanyahu administration. What's going on within the Netanyahu administration? Are we seeing some sort of unity as we saw it before?
No, it's a clown show. So it is now breaking out along partisan lines. Netanyahu's popularity among, his public support is diminishing with each passing day. You've got the ultra right wingers, Smotrich and Ben Gavir, wanting to be even more radical, and Netanyahu's trying not to, trying to keep them at arm's length. But then the others, Danny Gantz, and the other opposition leaders that came and joined the unity government in the aftermath of the October 7th attack, they're becoming more outspoken. So the divisions that separate, let's call it the conservatives and the liberals, or the pro-Netanyahu from the anti-Netanyahu crowd, it's growing. It's become significant, and it's affecting how things are done. I mean, just the other day, they held a meeting about Netanyahu chaired a council, his war council, without the defense minister present. So then it was a direct rebuff of the defense minister. So when you're doing that, you're playing these kinds of juvenile games, and Israel's jeopardizing its security in the process.
There are reports that Biden is running out of patience with Netanyahu for this operation in Gaza. Do you think this is part of their policy in Gaza, or it's because of the 2024 election that they're thinking that their policy in Gaza is hurting them at home?
Well, it is. It's clearly hurting them at home. And that's, the media reports the story that way, but that's not what's going on. Biden would have trouble finding Israel on a map, much less Gaza. Asking the difference between Palestine and the West Bank, he would wonder if West Bank was a new business that had opened up in Delaware, and would wonder what kind of credit card is that bank issuing. So he's not in control of the policy. His advisors around him, though, recognize they got a problem. The people 30 years of age and younger, they're with Hamas. They don't like Israel. And even in Israel, you've got a significant number of Jews, particularly in the under 30 age, that are coming out protesting what their government's doing. So this is the longer this conflict goes on, the greater the rifts and divisions within the Jewish community, both within Israel and between Israel and the United States. And it's going to become more and more intense. right now there are efforts to impose some sanctions on Israel to, limit, the cases before the International Court of Justice is one example, to accuse them of genocide. So I see these kinds of these events aren't going to let up. And then you've got the de facto, let's call them de facto economic sanctions that the Houthis have imposed. They're not letting the cargo ships come and go from Israel through the Red Sea. So it's delaying shipment, increasing the cost that the Israelis are having to pay for goods. And then, it's going to damage the Israel's economy in the process. So it's just, it's not just one problem. It's not just one task. They're facing, and they haven't even, they're talking about wanting to open up a front with Hezbollah. If they do that, they're dead. Israel's dead.
It seems that this war is widening in Southwest of Asia. Iran attacked the Erbil air base in Iraq. They are talking about Israelis and Mossad in that region. Why Iran is attacking Iraq? We had bombing of Pakistan. What are the reasons of these attacks?
Down in Baluchistan, those are really the original Middle East rug merchants. Okay, the Baluchis are rug merchants. The United States intelligence community, I know, had contact with Baluchis going back right after the Iranian Revolution in 1979. A friend of mine who was involved with the operation to rescue American hostages in Tehran, he was one of the guys on the ground there undercover. But prior to that, he had been in contact with a Baluchi family that lived in all places in Bethesda, Maryland, in Bethesda, Chevy Chase. And I actually used to live around the corner from the rug store these guys owned. And those Baluchis messages would be rolled up in these carpets and passed back and forth, when they would come to the United States. So my point is, CIA has had contact with these Baluchis in an intelligence role, both for destabilizing Iran and creating problems in Pakistan when they want to. That's why Iran hit that base, sending the CIA a message. We're going to kill your people. Because Iran's not sure who exactly was behind the bombing that took place on January 3rd, January 4th. That killed all of those people at the cemetery to try to commemorate the assassination of Soleimani. But they hit that spot in Baluchistan, CIA target. They hit the spot in Erbil, Iraq, Israeli Mossad target. They hit the target in Syria. That was a British MI6 target and US CIA target. Iran was sending a very clear message to the United States, to the United Kingdom, to Israel. We're not going to play this game anymore. You hit us, we're going to hit you back. There's payback coming. Now you notice that Bashar al-Assad didn't have one crossword to say with Iran over them taking out this terrorist target in Western Syria. Iraq made some what I'll call pro forma protestations, but that's not going to lead to anything because, again, they were bombing up in Kurdish territory, and even the ruling Iraqi government down in Baghdad is not that wild about the guys, the Kurds. They just soon get rid of them if they could. But it was, killing Israelis. Mossad agent, at least I've seen as many as numbers as high as 5. And then going into the Baluch area, the Baluchistan. So, that's what's going on. This is, Iran has been overly patient. So it finally said, okay, we've been hit. We've been struck by terrorists. We're going to go after those terrorists that are likely involved with having carried this out.
Larry, it seems that you're getting more and more serious about attacking Iran, bombing Iran. Lindsey Graham is talking just a little bit, just bomb Iran a little bit. Just
You know, the old
why
saying,
they're so obsessed with bombing Iran? What are the consequences of these type of attacks if that happens?
well, the number one, he's played too many video games. You think this is a video game, you drop a couple of bombs and boy, winner, get to move to the next level. No. As you know, you don't get a little bit pregnant. You're either pregnant or you're not. So if they want to start bombing Iran, Biden has no legal authority to attack Iran. If he does, it will be an international war crime, unless he goes to the United Nations, to the United Nations Security Council, presents a case of showing that Iran had attacked deliberately U.S. Personnel, U.S. installations, U.S. territory, make that case to the United Nations, and the UN Security Council goes, okay, yeah, well, you're authorized. You can respond under international law. Okay. But then he's got the constitutional issue, because even though he gets permission from the UN, he's still supposed to get the US Congress to give him permission. And that's either through a declaration of war, or they can go through this clever little device. It's called AUMF, Authorization for the Use of Military Force, AUMF. And that was first trotted out in 2001, right after the 9/11 attacks. And the language in that said that giving the president authority to attack any terrorist group that had any kind of connection with those that carried out the attacks of 9/11. So it's real broad. Then when they decided to attack Iraq in 2003, they went with another AUMF, only this one didn't, have the backing of the UN Security Council. UN Security Council at least backed initially the war on terror. So in this case, Biden's going to have to go to Congress to get approval. I don't see Congress approving a bombing campaign on Iran in an election year. If they're dumb enough to do it, then what's likely to happen is you're going to get some U.S. pilots shot down. And just as the raids against the Houthis have been ineffective, the raids against Iran will be not only ineffective, but potentially destructive, because then Iran will hit back. Iran has the capacity to hit every U.S. military base in Syria, in Iraq, and in Pakistan. I think we still got one or two in Pakistan. So, this could get out of control quickly. People who've been divorced will understand what I'm talking about. I've never been divorced either, but I've dealt with people who've been through divorces. So the couple that was once in love now hate each other's guts and want to kill the other. That's the United States and Iran. We overthrew Mossadegh, and then Shah, he's our man. Shah in the United States, great love affair. Shah, turns out, was a son of a bitch. And then, the Ayatollah Khomeini comes along with the Islamic Revolution. All of a sudden, Shah's gone, and the United States is mad at Iran. Now, during those early days, the Iranian students took American hostages in Tehran, held them. And yet during that entire period, the United States continued to sell weapons to Iran through Israel up until about 1988, after the whole Iran-Contra mess blew up. Why? Because we wanted to weaken Iraq, because Iraq was backed by those damn Soviets, and gotta keep the Soviets' nose out of the Middle East. Plus, the Iraqis might be working on a nuclear weapon, so we wanted to help Israel, and the way to help Israel was to arm Iran. It was we were arming Iraq, but we were playing both sides. And then the Iranians fought back, and we didn't like that. So it is true that the Iranians were a major source of, quote, terrorist attacks in the 1980s, going after U.S. interests, because of U.S. involvement in Iran. But we saw that even though they're still described as the greatest state sponsor of terror in the world, no, they're not. The United States is, hands down. There are actually very, very few terrorist attacks you can pin on Iran. But this visceral hatred of the Iranians, because the mullahs, they get together every Friday and they, death to America, death to Satan, they go through that. And America gets all, oh my God, that's terrible. We got to stop that. But we've put about every sanction you could possibly put on Iran, hasn't stopped them. And without the United States' inability to get over its past breakup with Iran and try, let's say for the sake of the kids, we're going to get along. Yeah, the U.S. hasn't been willing to do that. So this enmity towards Iran is, a lot of it's based upon mythology too. And as well as gross misunderstanding of how large Iran is, how mountainous Iran is, the factories, military installations that have been built underground for protection, how difficult to access and destroy those are, and how technically competent and proficient the Iranians are. I don't think you're like an exceptional, you come out of an Iranian heritage. You're not someone exceptional. You're like typical. You represent what a lot of Iranian guys your age are. Very smart, speak multiple languages, really good with science and math. Not a bunch of dummies. You're not going to be working at McDonald's saying, hey, sir, would you like to supersize that order? As they do in the United States. So we minimize and underestimate Iran at our peril in the United States, in my view.
We know that Vivek Ramaswamy right now is supporting Trump. Right now, how do you see the Trump's position in this 2024?
Yeah, I think Trump is stronger now going into 2024 than he was in 2020. He's not saddled with COVID. He's not saddled with the George Floyd riots. And it's Joe Biden's policies that are front and center. Biden, they keep thinking they can hide 12 million people who are illegal migrants that have flooded into the country. Well, that's not going to happen. That's an issue. It's become such an issue that even the liberal Democrat mayors in places like Chicago and New York City and Washington, D.C. are complaining about those Texans, that Texas Governor Abbott, who keeps sending all of these illegal migrants to their cities. It's stressing them out across the United States. It's a real problem. Then foreign wars. You're going to have the United States embroiled in war in Ukraine and Gaza, potentially in Iran. The people under 30 aren't buying it. The people under 30 in this country are largely pro-Palestinian, not pro-Israeli. They see Israel as a bunch of brutal apartheid thugs, which, apparently that's how they're behaving. So Trump has got those issues running for him. He's up against some stiff winds. The Democrats are using every legal and illegal trick in the book to try to prosecute as part of their persecution of Trump. And none of these cases have merit. I think they're all ultimately going to get rejected, defeated, but it's still forcing Trump to spend time on dealing with those. But it's been sort of an unexpected benefit for him because it shows him as the victim, that these establishment courts are persecuting him and unjustly prosecuting him. Well, that really resonates in the Black community. Black community argues, man, these white people are constantly taking advantage of us and persecuting us. And Donald Trump says, yep, just like me. So you get some resonance and support right there that's increased. And then with the youth vote that's running away from Biden as fast as they can, that they view it as voting for Grandpa Simpson from the television show The Simpsons. Except Grandpa Biden is, mentally deficient, demented. Can't really remember a lot of things. Then on top of that, you got RFK Jr. who's running. Well, he's going to strip votes. Some think he'll strip votes, independents from Trump, to some extent, but he's going to take more votes from Biden. Ditto for there's this group called No Labels. Now, I don't know if you've heard of them, but they're headed up with Joe Lieberman, Joe Manchin, and there's some other people less noted. The woman that's behind it is Nancy Jacobson. She's like the executive director. She's married to a guy named Mark Penn, who was Hillary Clinton's pollster. So right there, you got a Democrat tie-in. And they keep insisting that, they're tired of the labels conservative. They're tired of the labels liberal. They're going to go with the no labels, except they don't even have a sense of humor to understand that they've got a label. They're a label now. No labels. We're the label that has no name. And their plan is that they got some magical candidates that are going to appear out of nowhere in March, April, May, that all of a sudden those candidates they'll have to scramble around the country to try to get them registered, but that these will be so amazing that people will just want to vote for them. I don't care if you ran Jesus Christ, you're not going to get that kind of reaction. The one thing Trump has going for him that no other politician does is the popularity and the celebrity and the identity. The only other politician we've seen in my lifetime that could draw a crowd like this, well, maybe two. Barack Obama in 2007, 2008, and then a little bit into 2009. But, the shine wore off of him pretty quick because he didn't do much for the Black community. He turned out to be as much of a warmonger as George W. Bush. So, he was not drawing the massive crowds, these crowds wild with emotion that he was when he was on the campaign trail. And then maybe John F. Kennedy. He had some of that, pizzazz and appeal. But again, he actually lost the presidential election in 1960, but Nixon was better at stealing it. Then Kennedy went on to become a pretty popular young president, charismatic. But really, nobody matches Trump in terms of his ability to pull crowds. I'm not saying he's been great on a policy. He's terrible at selecting people. But the rhinos, the Republicans in name only crowd, the ones who hate Trump, they have rallied around Nikki Haley. They want Nikki. Some people call it neocon Nikki, nasty Nikki. Now stories out today that Nikki was having a sexual affair with one of her campaign managers before she ran for governor the first time in South Carolina. So, more dirt's going to come out on her. She may win the primary in New Hampshire next Tuesday only because New Hampshire allows independents and Democrats to vote, and you may get enough and there's not a Democrat primary, so you don't have anybody on the Democrat side drawing attention. So Democrats could turn out to vote for Nikki Haley just to give Trump a black eye, but that's not going to mean anything. The next one will then be South Carolina. Trump will win in South Carolina, and then it's over. It's over for Nikki. It's over for DeSantis.
Larry, it seems what Biden did during these 3 years of his presidency was the most important gift to Donald Trump.
I can't tell you the name of the journalist. If I told you the name of the journalist, you would go, oh my God. But his wife, lifelong Democrat, voted for Biden in 2020, told him the other day, if it's still Biden and Trump, I'm voting for Trump. This is
Wow.
ridiculous.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. So it's that Biden's had that effect. They've gotten accustomed that they can just repeatedly lie to themselves and lie to the American people that they start believing their own lies. And they're just, that's what they are. They're lies.